Hello, welcome to Tuesday Talks, brought to you by Always United, an affinity group of the United Way of the Midlands. First of all, I'd like to thank AARP Driver Safety, who is sponsoring Always United. And also, I would like to ask all of you who are here who feel comfortable, please sign in, let us know who you are and that you're here, and let us know if you are a member of Always United. You might want to share why you joined. And if you're not a member, we hope you'll decide to join with us. Now I'd like to introduce our activities chair here at Always United, Claudia Brooks, who will be presenting our speaker to you.
Hi, Liz. Thank you. And again, check in with us. And Liz, keep up with those, and we'll be answering you on screen and answering questions at the end of the presentation. So I am so happy to be able to present an international speaker for us today, Debbie Howard. She's chairman at Tokyo-based Carter Group, JMRN, and she's founder of Aging Matters International and the caregivingjourney.com. Debbie is a former caregiver who was inspired by her experience as a live-in caregiver for her mother during her last days. At the time she became a caregiver, Debbie was living and working in Japan, and where she had been running her marketing research company for 20 years. Her experience returning to Greenville, South Carolina to care for her mom and returning and running her business in Tokyo from there was nostalgic and deep, yet not without a few difficulties. She ultimately interviewed 200 caregivers of all types and wrote a book to help other caregivers manage their caregiving journeys with more ease and grace. And that book's titled The Caregiving Journey: Information, Guidance, and Inspiration. Really good book, good and helpful book. Over the past few years, she started a website, a newsletter, and most recently a podcast, all to help advocate on the part of family caregivers. Today, in addition to webinars like this, Debbie helps companies to develop and run support programs designed to help employee caregivers. Debbie was raised in Malden and Simpsonville, South Carolina, and she was graduated from the University of South Carolina's Journalism School in 1976. And we want to give a special thanks to John David Spade, because that's how we know Debbie, John Spade actually hired Debbie for her first job right out of the journalism school for the City of Columbia's Public Information Office. Debbie, we're so glad to have you, and so many of us online have either been caregivers or expect to be caregivers or maybe need caregiving ourselves. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Absolutely, Claudia. It's a pleasure to be here.
And we'll ask people to give you questions, but we'll hold them to the end. Okay?
Okay. Thank you. Thank you all. And it's good to be back in South Carolina, even if it's virtually. Adina, may I ask you to start the slides? Okay, we're going to be talking today about the journey of caring for our loved ones. And I'd like to just tell you a little bit about my story. As Claudia mentioned, I was working in Japan for about 20 years when my mother was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. And I got the call one day, and it really threw our lives into an uproar. My mom, myself, and my 2 younger sisters. And the rest is history. We managed to get through it. And it was a very traumatic situation, as most caregiving situations are. But I believe some good has come out of it, and that my mother has shown me the way forward in my own life to help other caregivers to manage their situations better. So I'll just tell you a little bit about the caregiving situation in the world at large. One thing I'd like to point out to start with is that over half of you who are listening to this webinar will be non-professional caregivers for an adult family member in the next 5 to 10 years. Many of you may be new caregivers because of the pandemic. but certainly statistically, even without the pandemic, over half of you will be asked to be non-professional, unpaid caregivers, talking about people like you and me who don't have medical training and are asked and needed to step in to take care of our aging loved ones. For most families like mine, it takes a trigger event to force serious conversations. Most caregiving situations happen very quickly. It may be because of a fall, that's a high statistical probability, or it could be a cancer diagnosis or an Alzheimer diagnosis, but usually these are sudden things that happen. And most people don't talk about it before the fact, but I can tell you it's worse if you don't. I was very, very fortunate because my mother was very proactive, and she forced us to sit down and talk about her wishes for her aging and her dying days when she was only 65 and was perfectly healthy. It took about 10 years longer before she actually needed to put those things into action. But the fact is, we had a really decent plan, and many families don't have that. And my statistics show that only about 5% of all families in the United States have had the kinds of discussions that we would like to have in order to have a good plan. This is a global problem that affects us all. My time in Japan made me very aware of what was happening in the most rapidly aging society in the world. But we will have 1 billion people age 65 or more worldwide. We have that now. 30% of the population in Japan is aged over 65 right now. That compares to 20% in the United States. And I did a little homework for South Carolina. It's 20 to 22% in South Carolina as well. So that is a huge percentage of the population that is 65 plus. And we have 10,000 baby boomers turning 65 every day in the United States. We have a growing older population across the state of South Carolina. The median age increased from 39 to 41, almost 42 years old between 2010 and 2018. Those are according to the latest census figures. And we have over 770,000 family caregivers, and they provide $7.4 billion a year in services in free help if we were to value their time at minimum wage. So it's an amazing statistic. When we look at the annual expenditures of Medicare in the United States, that is the volume of level that family caregivers are providing every year in the United States. And we can see it right here in South Carolina. This is a new study that just came out in April this year from AARP and the National Alliance for Caregiving. And it shows us that from 2015 to 2020, we have had a real increase in the number of caregivers. So 53 million Americans are providing unpaid care. And that is on the rise because of our aging population. We also see that nearly 1 in 5 are providing unpaid care to an adult with health or functional needs. So that would include adults over 50 and also adult children that may have disabilities. When we look at the number of people being cared for, and again, this was taken right in the middle of COVID, so they're a little bit supercharged numbers, but I've looked at the data from over 20 years, and this is all tracking, and it's all on the rise. So more Americans are caring more for more than one person. More family caregivers are having difficulty coordinating care. And more Americans are caring for someone with Alzheimer's disease or dementia. There are over 100 kinds of dementia, by the way, which is one reason why it's so hard to diagnose and treat. There are also more family caregivers reporting their own health is fair to poor. One of the things that we know about caregiving is that it has high potential to have negative impacts on the caregiver's health, both physical and emotional, and also financial. When we look at who are today's family caregivers, the traditional family caregiver was always a female, thought to be a female, about 49 years of age, and with about 3/4 of them working. Nowadays, what we're seeing is a much more diverse group of caregivers. We're seeing more men, we're seeing more millennials, and even younger caregivers in the Gen Z age group. So we're looking at 8 to 23. So youth caregivers and young caregivers, those would probably be for grandparents, but still we're seeing an increase in all of those different kinds of caregivers. And we're also seeing that these situations of caregiving are really starting to impact the workplace. So we all know that government and social safety nets are strained, and that's starting again to affect the workplace because there's not enough support. And what we're starting to see is that the negative effects of caregivers on the workplace are starting to become known. Yet still, we don't have good statistics, and employers really don't understand the hidden cost yet of the needs that their working employees needs. And I'm talking about employees who are working full-time jobs and then going home to spend an average of 20 hours a week on their caregiving at home. So let's look a little bit at some of the hidden costs to employers. You can imagine that turnover is higher. We know that about 30% of caregivers actually end up leaving their jobs eventually when the caregiving responsibilities at home become too great. While there's still caregiving, though, of course, there's absenteeism, which costs employers money. There's presenteeism, not being able to fully be there at the job because you're worried that you might get an emergency call from home. That's part of the unexpected events and the emergencies that are part and parcel of being a caregiver. Obviously, there's a cost to other workers having to pick up the slack. There are higher healthcare costs related to caregiving employees because of the negative impact on healthcare. It's a very stressful role, the caregiving role. And in fact, about 30% of caregivers suffer clinical depression. This is one of my favorite quotes, and I'd like to ask everyone who's watching to think about your family and your friends, and think about your neighbors and your coworkers. There are many, many of them, probably about at least 20 to 30% of your family, friends, coworkers who are actually caregiving. They may not talk about it because it's a very difficult discussion to talk about. But they're largely invisible in our society. They're behind a curtain. They're among us, but we don't have the eyes to see them. And one of the reasons that I do these webinars and blog on this topic is because I would like society to have the eyes to see caregivers and to do more for them. So let's look at some strategies and solutions. As an individual, and this is whether you think you're going to be a care receiver or whether you think you're going to be a caregiver, you need to have your first conversation with your parents or grandparents about their wishes. How would they like to age? What are their wishes about the final days? These are not easy conversations to have, and it will not be one conversation. It will be a series of conversations. So the sooner you get started, the better. I hear lots of stories from caregivers and families, and usually either the parents or the children, adult children, don't want to have these conversations. It's usually one of them or both, but I would like to encourage all of you. For example, my mom made us have the conversation. We did not want to have the conversation, but she made us have the conversation when she was well. And that is a great time to have that first conversation when there aren't any stresses from an illness or any pressures from having to move someone from a hospital to a rehab center. So have your first conversation, start checking the boxes on your plan, and set dates for completing any items that are not yet done. Let's say in the first conversation, you can't quite get to how are we going to do the medical power of attorney and the financial power of attorney. Put a date on that. Let's decide that next year. You'll be able to download a free resource guide after this webinar, and one of the items on that list is an AARP free excerpt from a 200-page book. This is about 50 pages, the excerpt is. It's the first free chapters. It is a comprehensive guide. It's got everything you need to get you started and take you all the way through thinking about it now through to final arrangements. And I'm going to give you a few examples of some of the detailed checklists that are in this book. So we've got, starting with, let's say, assessing activity levels, what people can do on their own versus what they might need help with, home safety, emergency preparedness. These are all important things. Again, it's a 200-page book, so I'm just going to give you a few highlights, but the point is there are resources out there that can help you, and many of them are free or very low cost. There are to-do checklists in here, and not just, can we go back one, Adina? Sorry, I just wanted to point this out. So let's say you want to locate important information and note where it is. Then it also gives you a list of what is all that information and where do I find it? This is often a problem if you wait until something goes wrong and you can't find the important papers that you need to find. That's a terrible situation to be in, and it adds stress to an already stressful situation. This is one of my favorite, and I'm going to be talking a little bit more about this on the next slide, but taking care of yourself is so, so important. Starting now, before you are a caregiver, certainly after you're a caregiver. And no caregiver wants to hear somebody say, please take care of yourself, because there's no time. But I'm going to try to give you a few tips for doing that. So the first tip, if you're an individual, again, if you're a person who thinks you're going to need to receive care, or if you're going to be a caregiver, is to make that plan and to work that plan and work on the iterations of that plan until you get it the way you want. Once your parent needs help or your loved one needs help, like my mom, we went into full gear and we refined the plan that we already had. We had a good plan, but of course, once we knew what my mother's health condition was, we had to revise that plan. And you'll find that as a caregiver. The second thing you can do is start focusing on your self-care right now. If you're not a caregiver yet, or if you're not a care receiver yet, you should be focusing on your self-care. You should be developing your own approach to getting nutrition that you need, movement and sleep, and time to yourself. These things we all need. COVID has thrown us all into an uproar. I have found that it's been very, very difficult during this time, but it is so important that we keep our focus and our eyes on our self-care. And then, of course, if you have a good plan and a self-care program, you'll go into the caregiving situation stronger. And if you're already caregiving, you'll need to escalate your efforts while you're actively caregiving. I actually was better at my self-care while I was caregiving because I was so scared and nervous not to do that. I knew that if I ran out of juice, if I ran out of energy to help my mom, there was no one else there to help. Let's look at the workplace now, and enhancing workplace support. There are so many areas that we can work on this situation in the workplace, and they don't cost very much. They do take time and effort and commitment from top management, but they are absolutely not expensive. So I'd like to just mention to you that, and you know, I'm a market researcher, so I love my research. This is not a new conversation. This subject has been being researched for over 20 years by government, academia, and business consortiums. And there are some very solid results. And when you look at the ebook for companies that is also a free download as a part of this webinar, you will find about 10 different sources at the end. And I encourage you to download the full PDFs of all of those reports if you'd like to know any more about this situation. But 3 of the areas where we find great stability in the research and the numbers, regardless of who's done the studies, we understand that caregivers want more flex time and paid time off. Whatever we're giving right now legally is not enough. And it's often not used. For example, Family Medical Leave Act in a company is often not used for caregiving. It's used for child caregiving, and it's used for disability time off. But many people in the caregiving situation in companies do not feel comfortable telling their bosses that they're caregiving. There's a stigma attached to it. And this is where providing resources and providing a nurturing environment and a caring environment in a company is very, very important, because caregivers need to feel that they can talk about their situation and get support for that, just like new moms do, just like people in companies who are planning for retirement get planning assistance, just like people with alcoholism and drug abuse problems get support. Caregivers, working caregivers, are a special employee segment who need support in your company. And we have actual statistics that show that recruiting and retention efforts are better when you have caregiving programs. And in fact, I'd like to read you this statistic, because for every dollar invested in flexible work arrangements, businesses can expect a return ranging from $1.70 to $4.34. So we have evidence over time, over many years, that these types of programs actually really help in companies. So let's talk a little bit about how executives, managers, and human resources can address the needs of family caregivers in your companies. The first thing is to survey your employees and understand how many caregivers you have. We estimate it's 20 to 30% of your employee workforce. 20% before COVID, probably 30 or more now. We have many, many more sandwich caregivers now who are taking care of children at home while they are also caring for their parents. We have many people who have brought their parents to live with them from assisted living and from nursing centers. We have many employees who now cannot visit their family members in assisted living or nursing facilities because they're in lockdown, and that creates a whole other level of stress. So surveying your employees to understand how many employees are caregiving and what they would like as a way of support is a very important first step. And then reviewing and assessing the most needed benefits versus what is already offered in your company. Many companies already have programs for working moms and other special employee segments that can be repurposed and repackaged for working caregivers. And I highly recommend this because it's, again, it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. And I think looking at what you're already offering and seeing what can be repurposed first is a great first step. And then start adding programs. And of course, starting a dialogue between leaders and employee caregivers and nurturing that caring environment in your company by telling stories about your employee caregivers in your employee publications, for example. Let's look at some strategies and solutions from local and state agencies. These are United Way supported agencies who all provide various levels of resources. Some of them even respite care vouchers, information, referral services. It's very important that as a caregiver, you look into resources that are already available like this. We have more national resources listed in the handout as well. And there are even more. For example, the Alzheimer's Association of South Carolina also has respite care vouchers. And so we will be working on building this list for you over time. But I think it's reasonable to say that once you start looking, it's amazing what you can find in the way of resources here and there. There are also support groups that you can join so that you can talk out with other caregivers who are in your same situation about possible solutions to your challenges. The Rosalind Carter Institute of Caregiving has done amazing work over the last, I would say, 20 to 30 years. And Rosalind Carter's famous quote, "Those who have been caregivers, those who are currently caregivers, those who will be caregivers, those who will need caregivers." It's really all of us in the whole world. Again, I'm Debbie Howard. You can check me out online. The caregivingjourney.com is my website. There are resources there. We're updating our resources page now. You can also look at my book on Amazon and see if that looks like something you might be interested in. I also have a free bi-weekly newsletter that comes out and gives you tips and tricks and different perspectives on caregiving. And of course, our new podcast, which just launched Sunday, the 8th. And finally, please take advantage of our free downloads. This ebook, The Employer's Guide to Workplace Support for Family Caregivers, I did with a caregiving consultant friend of mine. It's got fabulous statistics and ways forward for you as a company. And then the Caregiving Resource Guide from Aging Matters International, which has it's 15 pages full of gold, if I do say so myself. There are resources in the planning area, the surviving and thriving area, the relaunching when caregiving is done area, self-care, and also 3 resources that you might want to look at for COVID-specific resources.
Debbie, thank you so much. That was wonderful information. And you and I had a chance to talk before this. So we both had our caregiving journeys. And as I said, I know, I've had to have that conversation with my adult children about myself and how I need to, the things I'd like. Do you have any kind of pointers for folks who want to engage their adult children and who are maybe resistant to that?
Okay. Well, if you, I have a blog on that that kind of helps you get started. And I think there are lots of things to think about when you think about having that first conversation. It's a very tender spot as you know, and as you mentioned, Claudia. So I think, one thing to think about as you prepare for those conversations is to get yourself really clear on your own emotional resistance points and
Mhm.
and just try to, you cannot ever control what someone else thinks, but you can control what you think, and you can read other stories. You can be educated. You can educate yourself so that you are more neutral when you go into that conversation, so that you can be an adult and you can de-stress and de-emotionalize that type of conversation. It's a very stressful thing. I hear so many stories where, somebody tries to have that conversation, and then the parent goes, "What are you trying to do? Rush to get your inheritance?" Or, or the child goes, "I can't imagine a world without you in it, so I don't want to have that conversation." It's a
Mhm.
really difficult conversation. We're talking about dying, and this is very difficult. So I recommend you read a few articles, Google around about it, get yourself in a more informed space, and there are also articles about why a parent might resist talking about it. And there are some really good tips in some of my blogs about this. But I think, other than getting your head in the right place, which I think is a really important piece of advice for anyone, I think you should have a plan for that first meeting, and you should plan it for 1 hour. You should not rush in from something else with your cell phone on and dinging and danging. You need to clear the decks, make a nice quiet time, and make a short first conversation, so that you're almost like exploring the territory and the space, the emotional space, to see where your loved one's resistance points might be. And maybe you might want to even practice your opening for the meeting, because it's a meeting, just like we do in work.
Slightly. Well, and I'll add, Melanie Dalton sends in a question. In larger families, there's generally one adult child who becomes the primary caregiver. What are the best ways for other siblings to support the caregiver sibling? What do caregivers say they most look for from their siblings?
Okay, thank you, Melanie, for that question. That is true, and the hospice counselors I worked with told me there was always one. There's always one, so it's so true. I was the one in our family. I happen to be the oldest of three girls, but my two sisters and I worked so closely as a team. In the first year, as my mom went through chemotherapy cycles and that sort of thing, and I was working in Japan, talk about from afar. I couldn't be there all the time, but my sister, who lived in Malden, was living within 1 hour of my mom, who was in Greenville. And so my sister was able to stop by on a regular basis, go to doctor's appointments, and was a huge, close living support there during my mother's first year. My sister Sandy lived 3 states away, and she wasn't as able, because of her new job, to go back and forth. But between the 3 of us, we were able to give my mom very, very good coverage. So I think for siblings to first of all be so thankful and grateful that one of you can take the time to be a full-time caregiver, and to graciously offer anything you can do to help. Maybe one sibling can take the finances. Maybe one sibling can take the day in, day out work. Maybe one sibling can run for groceries. There are so many things that we can do. And even if we don't live nearby, they now have software. And one of the resources in the guide is for software that helps your family, even if you're living in several different states, to put all the medical information and all the caregiving information in one place, so that everyone can access it. I think the most important thing siblings can do is to be open-minded to helping, and don't just say, "What can I do to help?" Like, offer to do something. you know, like,
Good.
like,
That's good advice.
like, can I come sit with mom and give you 3 hours break? Like, ask what you can do specifically. Does that help, Melody?
And
And
there's a follow-up from Melanie.
yes,
What advice is there for the partner spouse of the caregiver, and how can that partner best support their spouse?
well, I think acknowledging the situation and understanding what a stress and strain it is on the caregiver is a really good first step. I hear many situations where the men didn't even they were in a caregiving situation, but really the wife was taking care of most of the heavy lifting. And so they were a little bit removed from the caregiving situation. And I think acknowledging what a difficult job it is a first step, and then offering something specific that you can do to take something easy off the caregiver's plate. There are lots of things. I mean, everything that has to do with running a household. like pick one and offer to help.
I'm going to change directions a little bit now. We had some questions about companies, but first the one from John Spade. Let me get this to show. Do you offer any programs for individual companies? You had group information you were talking about.
Yes, thank you, John. Yes, we offer a free 30-minute consultation. If you would like to brainstorm with me about what your company can do to help your working caregivers, I would be more than happy to chat with you. There is a free survey that you can use from AARP to survey your employees. I offer several different programs with lunch and learn sessions through webinars and live when we get to do that again. I also have a content program so that you can start communicating about these issues through your employee communications channels.
And there was a question that came in earlier, and I know you covered some of this in your presentation, but what are some of the examples of best practices by companies in terms of providing support to their employees and who are also caregivers?
So this is one of my favorite topics because it's really not difficult to find ways to support your employees. So we talked about the basics: survey, develop a strategy and an approach, get started, and nurture that caring spirit. Let me tell you what some of the leaders in the space are doing. And this would be about, I'm going to say, maybe 20% of companies, large companies. We're just getting started, and it's going to be a labor of love. But I think this COVID situation is really highlighting what an important issue this is. So let me tell you some of the really cool things that some companies are doing at the leading edge. Digital concierge services that can help support those who are caregiving for aging loved ones, emergency backup care and time off, extra time off, more than just what is legally required, on-site support from an elder care consultant, either through on-site when we can do that again, or through online resources. I love this one, a time bank that allows non-caregiving employees to donate their vacation or sick days to those employees who are caregiving, to give them the extra flex time and time off that they would like to, that they need.
Wonderful idea.
And sorry?
I should say, wonderful ideas. Along those lines, do you find that sometimes this comes from management as a start to this, or is this something that the Gen Xers and the millennials who may be watching today could take to their companies?
I'm having a lot of trouble hearing you, Claudia. I'm sorry. There's a lot of wobble on the line. Sorry.
I'm sorry. Can you hear me better now?
Yes, a little bit. Yes.
Okay. If when you're talking to companies or companies contact you, do you generally find that it's coming from management who will ask for these services or help, or do you find that maybe the Gen Xers and the millennials who are working in the workplace are are asking their management for help?
I'm still not clear on the question, but I'm getting calls from leadership and from human resources departments. And I think one of the big concerns these days is the fact that the millennial caregiving audience is growing. There was a little bit of reticence when it was, let's say, 50 plus, but now that we see that a full quarter or more of all caregivers are actually millennial, and then we add in the sandwich caregivers, that is having a direct impact on workforces. And it's also really hurting the passing on of institutional knowledge when, let's say, 30% of caregivers have to retire from the workforce because of those responsibilities.
Well, are there any last words you'd like to offer to our audience?
I would just like to encourage everyone, whether you're actively caregiving or not right now, to open your eyes and be aware of this problem and challenge in our society, and start thinking about your own caregiving journey. And don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. It's a part of life. It's a natural part of our lives. And by facing up to it and thinking about it, you can actually have a fighting chance at managing it with more ease and grace.
Well, thank you so much for your information today. I know we're going to get some real requests for those resources that you have available, and we'll get that in a second. I'm going to add Liz in here. So, Liz, I want to just say, wonderful job. Didn't she do?
She did a great job, and I'm sure that everybody watching was really glad to have this subject come out, because it is something that we are all concerned with. Some of us are young enough to be caring, and some of us are old enough that soon will be needing care. So it's something we should all be concerned with. So thank you, Debbie. I think Claudia and Adina will be having something posted that will tell everybody where they'll be able to get some of these resources, where they can download the resources. And I hope that you all will join us for another Tuesday talk coming up soon. We have one on December 15th. They're always at noon. It's always a Tuesday. And we're going to have a featured speaker will be John Tudor, saying the magic is in you. So be looking for more information about that and to sign up for that. Also, we're going to be doing the same sort of program that we've done in the past. This year, it's called Santa's Senior Elves. There's something posted on Always United that will tell you where you can sign up to purchase a gift for a senior. These are seniors that the names have been provided through Senior Resources, which are people who are not eligible for any of these other traditional holiday drives that we have here in Columbia. The adoption is going to be open through December 3rd, and there'll be a gift drop-off at United Way on Blanding Street on December 7th and 8th. The times for those will be on the website. And also, if you don't feel comfortable driving down and delivering a gift, you may want to go online and order the gift and have it mailed to Always United at the United Way address, which again, that'll be on the website. Okay, Claudia, what am I leaving out here?
Well, you're not leaving out anything. We really have had a great time with those in the last 2 years. We've had a lot of people adopted, and we were able to have a wonderful lunch to collect those. Unfortunately, with COVID this year, we're going to have to do all of this virtually and drop-offs, but we're still going to have a really good time on December 15th. If you'll put that on your calendar, we're going to celebrate the magic of the season with, some information about those people who were helped through that, the Senior Santa Elves program, and find out how we did with that. And then John Tudor is a wonderful performer, magician, inspiring spokesperson who's going to really talk to us, about how the magic is in you. And this is a program for all ages. So if you're home and you want to have your children, your grandchildren, you want to pass it along, we'd love to have a big viewership that day, and we're looking forward to it. And you can learn all about these programs and others on always at alwaysunited.org. That's part of the United Way of the Midlands program. We're really glad to support United Way of the Midlands. So it's exciting that, these kind of programs have given us a lot of good, important information. And we're just going to end the year with some really fun information. So.
And now I guess it's time for Adina to come back
Adina,
for a minute.
There you go.
Hello. So, for Always United, I am the director of Always United, and so we are just a group of late career to retiree age individuals who are all just interested in giving back to United Way. So whether that be through volunteering or donating, just giving what they can to help the community, in just a group of people who are around the same age, going through the same times of life. And so if you are interested in that, like Claudia said, you can go to alwaysunited.org, or you can email at alwaysunited@ua.org. Also, if you are interested in some of the resources that Debbie spoke about, the way to be able to get those is by also emailing at alwaysunited@ua.org. And so if you just send an email, you can just find out about everything that you need to from that email address. And so thank you, everybody. Thank you, Liz, for being our chair and for introducing us and closing things out with me. And thank you, everybody, for coming.
And come back on December 15th for more.